I just wanted to show a little bit of information about voting, particularly by age, and why it's so important for young people to be engaged in this whole process of both voting and helping encourage their friends to vote. Where I have my big arrow down here, it shows the voting rates by age in 2016, which was another with general election, the last general presidential election. And only 45.6% of eligible voters from 18 to 24 voted in that election, which says that there is a huge portion of the electorate who are available to become engaged in the whole election process, and that's where the work is for everybody, to try to move up the youth voting. And as you can see, in my age category up on top, it's a pretty high percentage. Yeah. But if young people want their points of view, their ideas, and their sense of what's important in this country to be reflected in the electorate, they've got to move this number up a lot, and there's a lot of room to maneuver. Any other interesting ideas, questions you may have about voting in general?
Alex has a question. What is gerrymandering and why does it happen?
Oh, why does it happen? Gerrymandering is an interesting scenario. It actually comes from a mayor in 1812. Wow. Who named Jerry, Gerry. I believe he was in Massachusetts. Every 10 years we do a census, and that's the point at which voting districts are drawn to reflect the census, so that there are approximately equal amounts of people in the various districts. But in the case of gerrymandering, one party which may have political power in a state can exercise undue influence in drawing the lines of where those districts are. And in the case of a good old Eldridge Gerry back in 1812, political cartoonists said that he drew the boundaries that would look like a salamander. And if you can think of a map and having kind of like little waves of boundaries, that's kind of what it turned into. Yeah. And what that did was capture people who were likely to vote for one party all in one really contorted area, which then allowed other areas to be represented and to contain voters who were more likely to vote in the other party. And what that did was pretty much ensure there are safe districts for people of one party, and that there isn't enough competition in other districts. And therefore, it sort of preserved the power of the existing party in that state. And that's a real problem, because
not a democracy.
The question of does my vote count then suddenly becomes very real for people if they're in a district where the other party almost never has a chance to overcome the boundaries of a group of people who are going to vote in one direction only. It's really a difficult thing. So it's why this year's census is such a big deal. One of the reasons, and it's why there's going to be a real knockdown drag out fight might be too big a good expression, but there's going to be a lot of controversy about how the lines are drawn in the coming year. And that's actually, if there's something that anybody, and particularly young people, should care about in the coming year, it's going to be how those boundaries are drawn, and doing it in a way that ensures fairness to everyone, so that everybody's vote counts. I saw an analogy that said, basically, it's sort of the same thing as if you had the winner of the Super Bowl deciding what their schedule is going to be next year. It has that kind of unfairness attached to it.
And that's a good way to put it. It puts it into terms that are relatable.
Skew things in a way that really devolve to your advantage. And with gerrymandering, that's really unfortunate.
Perfect segue, because Allie asks, is the presidential election the most important election to vote in?
For some people, I guess it may be, but the reality is the things that touch our daily lives tend to be more local. This year may be a little bit of an anomaly because it's just so crazy, but things like who is the district attorney is suddenly becoming more real as we have people who are really concerned and seeing up close the fact that who is charged for a crime or not charged for a crime really devolves to somebody like a district attorney. That position becomes infinitely more important. The judicial elections, who decides, whether somebody is guilty or not guilty, and applies the laws that have been written, really affects an awful lot of people. One of the things that I think that people haven't seen terribly clearly is, and perhaps more so in Wisconsin these past few years, is the fact that voting laws have changed dramatically over the past 8 years or so.
Yeah.
And those state representatives, the legislators and the governor and then ultimately the judiciary, all have something to do with whether you're eligible to vote, how many kinds of things you have to prove in order to vote, how long we have to early vote. All of the processes are subject to laws that are made at the state level. And so, your ability to exercise your right to vote really comes down to a large degree state decisions. So those kind of, I don't want to say seemingly unimportant, but some of the elections that you might let go over your head actually really impact your ability to even if you care about a presidential vote, to cast that vote.
Yeah.
So, they're all important. And city councils, common council in Milwaukee, village boards in other places, they have a lot to do with how money is spent, how your police department functions, what rules that they need to deal with and obey as well in how they deal with their citizens. Those are all elections that matter as well. So and actually, I think one of the most interesting things is that in the elections that are non-presidential year elections, when the turnout is dramatically lower, typically, talk about your vote counting. So many fewer people vote. You have the ability, and you and a group of friends could actually really change things in a local election, and particularly primary elections. So, it is an ability to really have an impact.